Well, what's going on, guys? Evan, the MTG enthusiast here, bringing another MTG gameplay commentary. This is yet another deck tech. This time, this is one of my own creations. So, case in point, this is one of my lower power decks. It has some good cards in it, but I think it is a good time, and I've certainly accepted that I'll lose more than I win when I play this list. So, this is a Druid and Hydra pile. We're using Gargos here, the Watcher, as our commander. And so it's got a 8/7 for 6, reduce Hydra spells by 4, and whenever this becomes the target of a spell, it fights something. And that's really what it's about. It's kind of like Gargos Fight Club, which is a little bit more common than what I'm playing here, which is the Gargos Druid Nightmare pile. So this actually started for me as a true Hydra Tribal, mono green Hydra Tribal, and it was awful, which didn't necessarily surprise me. I expected the list to really struggle, but this was a great lesson for me, and sometimes the deck can be... sometimes the deck can be too much of a meme to actually be a good time, and that's how this deck kind of started. So you'd rush out Gargos, and then you'd kind of cheat a couple Hydras into play, and then realize that the Hydras you're cheating into play are basically big dumb idiots that are worse than just regular creatures. So let my failure be a lesson to everyone. If you want to make Hydra Tribal, put Gargos in the 99. Do not make Gargos your commander for Hydra Tribal, because honestly, it's just... it just doesn't work out, at least in my experience. That said, though, I wanted to do something a little bit different than Gargos Fight Club, which is basically you run Gargos, you ramp into Gargos, and then Gargos fights everything. We still got a little bit of that going on as a sub theme, but this is more of a kind of like Gargos is my Cthulhu, right? And I've got these pack of druids who are making mana and worshiping Cthulhu in the form of Gargos. So it's a lot of fun. There are definitely ways this deck could be improved by making it Elf Tribal or Gargos Fight Club, but this is kind of my pet creation, and so I'm going to walk out for you how I kind of came to what I was doing and how well it plays. As always, we've got this organized by tags. So we have a tremendous amount of ramp in this deck, way more than we need. We're not actually ramping into anything. The actual underlying premise is we wanted to run druids and elves, or ideally elves with the subtype of druid. That way we could play all these druid synergy cards and all these elf synergy cards. And then if the deck ever completely flopped, we could just pivot into like, I don't know, a druid tribal or an elf tribal, or we could take this in another direction because I sunk a couple bucks into this and I wanted to make sure my second revision was playable enough. And so 23 cards in this list are druids. And so we've got Arbor Elf, we've got, so basically your ramp package over here with Arbor Elf, Boreal Druid, Circle of Dreams Druid, Devoted Druid. All of these make varying amounts of mana, right? So you've got your 1 mana dork, another 1 mana dork. You've got your 3 mana mono green type guy, make, Guy's Cradle on a stick. We've got Devoted Druid here, which we don't really have any combo with Devoted Druid, but Devoted Druid's always kind of gross. We've got Druid of the Cow. You can see a lot of cards in here that you wouldn't normally play, but they're kind of fun here. And of course, we've got Elvish Archdruid. And so because most of these druids are also elves, in fact, the overwhelming majority of them are also elves, we also get like the tribal benefit here of the +1/+1, and we can make a ton of mana with this thing. Another dork. So here's a non-elf Fanatic of Runahas, and basically it's a 1/4 for 2, just like a really strong mana dork. There's probably a world where you cut this and you just play another mana dork instead that's like an elf, but an elf druid ideally. But this one's really good, and the Ferocious is just hilarious in this list. So for now, I'm going to keep it, even if it makes the list probably slightly less consistent. Another mana dork. Now we have a dork that also doubles as card draw, and I'm very happy with this card. Another dork here. We're getting to the 3 mana slot, right? Because we want to be able to play ramp on every sort of slot in the CMC wherever possible, between 1 and 4, with most of it being between 2 and 3. Gwenna is wonderful. This card can absolutely go off with this deck. if you start chaining Hydras and things like that. You've got, well, we don't really have as many Hydras as we used to, but you could still kind of chain off with her, and either way, she's a 3-mana dork. Heritage Druid. Heritage Druid is usually has enough targets to make at least 3 mana. It also lets you tap those elves that didn't come into play this turn, which is usually why it's in there. Incubation Druid, we have a couple ways to throw a 1/1 counter, so sometimes this becomes like a crazy undercosted ramp piece. And additionally, it's just a good 2-mana ramp. Then, of course, we've got the Acolyte here at 4 mana. For a 4-mana dork, you need to make a lot of mana, which this does. Another 1-mana dork. And then you get into Land of War Loam Speaker, where occasionally you can animate a land and punch a planeswalker or something. But for the most part, this is honestly just a dork. Land of War Tribe, one of the best dorks in the deck, a 3/3 for 3, is pretty aggressively costed, and tapping for 3 mana is just really good. You drop this on turn 3, you're on Gargos next turn. You love to see it. Marwyn here is a dork on 3, but also tends to make a lot of mana as the game goes on, and just grows, which is pretty nice. Priest of Titania needs no introduction, makes a lot of mana. Rishgar. Rishgar can turn sort of a non-dork creature into a dork, which is pretty nice, because there are a couple druids in here that don't make mana, and this is just a well-costed 3-mana make mana guy. And you could target itself, which is pretty cool, and so you can turn it into its own dork on 3, and if you don't have another one, that's okay. You can still put them on Rishgar. Selvala. So Selvala is a little bit complicated here. If you play her before you play Gargos, you'll get your card draw, and you're likely to always have the highest power card. The problem is you're probably not able to play something bigger than Gargos most of the time, at least not consistently. So the real reason this is in here is because this actually goes infinite with Staff of Domination. Several cards do. Because you can tap this and add a ton of mana to your mana pool if you've got a decent board state. And then if you've got the Staff of Domination here, you can untap the creature for 3. And so if you've got, 4 mana plus, you can make, if you can basically get per activation of your druid 5 mana or more, any of your druids, you've got 3 to untap the creature, 1 to untap the staff for 4. You're netting 1 mana each time. Tap this a bajillion times. You can draw your library, gain infinite life, and it's pretty great. Also, we need another angle to win games on, because sometimes combat just doesn't work. Now, we usually lose those games anyway, but this isn't a huge cost and actually plays well into the deck's game plan. But if you weren't going to run Staff of Domination, I'd probably cut Selvalia for something else. Soul Ring, because it's commander. I only have one deck that doesn't play a Soul Ring, and that is like a Cascade Pile. And lastly, we have Wirewood Channeler here on 4, which is the same premise. At 4 mana, we need to make a lot of mana, which this typically achieves. Next up, in the non-rant package of Druids, we've got, over here in the card draw, we've got Augur of Autumn, which we usually hit the Coven because most of our stuff has spread costs, but even if we don't hit the Coven, being able to play lands off the top is usually pretty good, along with peeking at what's up there. Beast Whisper, this usually draws us plenty of cards to justify it being in the list. We've got Freyalise. Freyalise is wonderful because we need something to remove artifacts and enchantments. It doubles as a pretty reliable card draw on this list, actually. Plus, we just make dudes. Pretty great after somebody wipes the table, slam Freyalise and get back in there. Start rebuilding your tribal board state. We've got Garruk Primal Hunter as a concession that sometimes we just need to get some cards, and we can also make some 3/3s and things like that. Helps us sustain through a board wipe. We've got Guiltleaf Archdruid, which we're playing here as a way to draw a card. Theoretically, if you have 7 druids, you can punk somebody out and take all their lands, but this is not likely to occur too often. Most of the time, you're just playing this for the card draw. Almost every game, you're playing this just for the card draw. But it's kind of fun to know that there's a world where you can, have enough creatures. Maybe if you drew Freyalise and you slam this thing to actually take somebody's lands. Now, what's interesting about that is if you take all of somebody's lands, you better hope that you've controlled their board state. Otherwise, they're going to try to remove you from the game with player removal. Hit you with everything they can, combo you out, whatever they need to do to kill you so they can get their lands back. Hunter's Insight. Hunter's Insight is probably one of the weaker card draw options in this deck. But with Gargos, you often will have an open attack and you'll draw a ton of cards off him. But the real reason you're playing this as a card draw option is because Gargos, of course, wants to be targeted, right? Every time we target Gargos, we get to fight something. And that is actually pretty important because we're in mono green, and this fight mechanic is one of our only ways to remove things. And so this kind of lets you do double duty, right? Where I can punch somebody with Gargos and maybe open an attack line and also refill my hand. Elf Tribal here also draws you a card if you can pay the green, which you often can. And since, almost all of our creatures are elves, we can usually keep fueling cards into this or at least get a card or two off it. Regal Force. So all our creatures are green, and this list does have a lot of creatures, and so we can often draw a lot of cards off Regal Force. That said, we are in the 7 mana space, and so we're not an elf or a druid, we're not a hydra. So this card often feels weak in a lot of cases. So this is probably where there's room to innovate, like cut a Regal Force and just honestly play a Harmonize, which is 4 mana in green to draw 3 cards. That's pretty good. Or play another sort of indestructible spell. There's a lot of options for what you could run here instead of this, but for now it's been good enough to justify staying in the deck. Card draw is so important. Return of the Wild Speaker. This is actually an all-star in this because, drawing the cards is the number one reason it's in here. But giving all of your dudes, your lords, +3/+3 is funny because sometimes you'll survive a Toxic Deluge where somebody doesn't overpay on the total for obvious reasons. Or you just swing out and kill somebody with Return of the Wild Speaker. Strongly recommend. Staff of Domination is something to do with all this crazy mana we're making, in addition to going infinite with a kill with the Mana Dorks. The Great Hinge is in here because it makes every green deck better. We need card draw, 1/1 counters. This does everything we need it to do, but the part that makes this kind of an awkward conversation is I'd argue the Great Hinge does well in every green deck that has enough creatures, so I don't know, it's wild. Throne of Eldraine, this is mostly in here for the card draw, but the turn 5, playing it as a ramp piece, isn't the worst. You can often slam this on turn 5, choose green, and then you can tap 4 and still get a guy if you're behind on board. So I really like it. So fight. We don't want to run a lot of dedicated fight cards because typically you want to have utility stapled on. That's kind of the whole benefit. You could run fight cards with anything. Now, if you target Gargos with a fight spell, you get to fight twice, but that usually doesn't justify the slot. That said, Archdruid's Charm, very, very flexible. This is going to let us find, a land. We can still ramp with this in a pinch. Usually won't do that. We can also go find a creature, some sort of mana dork, like a big mana dork if we need to, or more often some sort of card draw creature. And of course, you've got your exile target artifact or enchantment, so we have one card that can answer the One Ring. And the fight element of it does come with a 1/1 counter, so it's pretty good. Legolas's Quick Reflexes. So this is just too good not to run at split second. Being able to deal the damage without having to fight is great if you need to remove some huge creature, and you can hit your Gargos with this so that you can deal Gargos' damage to it, and then fight on top, or use Gargos' damage plus fight something else, save you from a kill spell. Really, really like Legolas's Quick Reflexes. Super pushed, super strong. Highly recommend. Whip Silk. So Whip Silk is wild. So when you enchant your dude, you can fight something. When you enchant Gargos, rather, and you can keep fighting from there. Returning the Whip Silk lets you fight over and over and over, which is why this is in here. Whip Silk plus Gargos equals sort of unlimited fights, provided Gargos doesn't die. Also, I do want to point out, you don't have to necessarily target Gargos. Most of the time you will, but if anything you control is targeted, Gargos fights it, which is kind of the premise, right? Kind of the meme of the deck, right? Gargos is protecting his followers. They summon him, and then he defends them on the battlefield. I don't know, my lore is lame, but I enjoy it. Up here into the actual Hydras we're running, this used to be a count of like 30 Hydras, and the deck was terrible. Apex Devastator, though, still very, very good. 10 mana, reduced by Gargos. This becomes very castable very early, and we'll likely be able to cast it just with regular mana as the game draws on. Cannot speak highly enough of this. Apex Devastator is a phenomenal card. Absolutely run it. Reducing this by 6 is hilarious because, then you're figuring what? 4 mana to cascade 4 times, 1 mana per cascade plus the 10/10. Oh, yeah. Good stuff. Benevolent Hydra. One of the better Hydras. Works well with Gargos, of course, to help pay for that X. But this also unlocks an infinite combo with us here with Benevolent Hydra plus Triskelion down here in the support world plus Vigor down here as well, which we'll go over that combo here at the end. So Neverwinter Hydra, this is just in here because it's awesome. Casting this off a Gargos or with a lot of mana, and you have an outrageously large Hydra with Ward 4 and Trample. It can end games, and it's just too fun not to play. Stillbane Hydra, you can never have too much artifact and enchantment removal, and this plays really well with Gargos and all this mana we're creating. It's on brand, so I really like it. It's definitely a flex slot, though. You could definitely cut this and run some other artifact removal, including the Druid of Purification or whatever, as another disenchant option. And Ferocious Hydra, once again, kind of another flex slot. But being able to have fight stapled onto another creature is pretty good, and doubling the counters on Ferocious Hydra is pretty good also. Definitely a potential cut, right? If you just want to play another card draw targeting spell, like Warrior's Lesson or something, in place of this, I think that's fine. I like it because it's once again kind of on theme, but absolutely cuttable. All right. All right, so we need to get into our support spells here, which is mostly indestructibility. We're playing most of, from my perspective, the good indestructible green cards. So, because you really don't want to get your Gargos removed, and your Gargos is constantly endangering itself by entering into combat. So we need a lot of good mono green protection spells. So you've got Collective Resistance here. So we can destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or get hexproof and indestructible with Escalate. Wonderful card. Fits into most commander shells. Certainly fits into this one. Gaia's Gift. 1/1 counter is great. It synergizes well with some other things we're doing. Reach, Trample, Hexproof, Indestructible, Keyword Salad. One of the better indestructible instants. Definitely play it. Heroic Intervention. This is how we protect our entire board state. Instant staple. Highly recommend it. Overprotect. So once again, this comes with Trample, Hexproof, and Indestructible. Pretty much guaranteeing your creature will live through anything but a board wipe. So can't recommend it enough. Smuggler's Surprise. So this is a lot of mana for what you're getting, and it doesn't work on all your creatures. Power 4 or greater is mostly Gargos or a Hydra in this list, but the flexibility is really great. Milling to get some lands and creatures, or putting 2 creature cards into play at the end of turn can be great. This is also sort of you've got a lot of mana in this deck. You are kind of in a board state where you haven't tapped out, you've got enough pressure on the board, and you can just kind of hold mana up to protect your guy, and then maybe put 2 extra guys out. It's strong. It's a lot of mana for what you're getting, especially because the indestructible element is kind of narrow. And I've often been tempted to swap this out for one of the other indestructible givers, but for the time being, it's earning its slot, right? It's under review. So then you've got Tamiyo's Safekeeping. The life gain is largely irrelevant, but for 1 mana, you're getting Hexproof and Indestructible. Really like it. So Tyvar Stand, target creature gets +X/+X, Hexproof and Indestructible. Great if you suddenly need to give your guy a huge buff to fight something big. But additionally, you can just do X = 0 and still get your Hexproof and Indestructible. Phenomenal trick. Would highly recommend playing. Vines of Vastwood, continuing on theme here. So Vines of Vastwood is likely something that should be swapped out, because you're just giving Hexproof and you're not really giving Indestructible. And so this is mislabeled here in my list. So we're going to move that into considering and make a swap here live. And I know just the card to put in. We'll do it at the end. And you've got Look Upon the Tarask here. This is a lot of mana for what you're doing. But also, It's the most flexible, right? We've got one of the more flexible options. We've got Run and Hide, so we can prevent all combat damage. So we can basically fog ourselves. And we also get this Gather Courage, right? So we can make Gargos, or another creature, largely Gargos, huge and everything has to block it. This also lets you throw Gather Courage on like a random dork, swing with Gargos and everything else, and then since everybody has to block the dork that you pumped and made indestructible, sometimes you can go in for lethal that way. Land-wise, Bridgeworks Battle. So we have the MDFC flip land here because it fights, and fighting is what we want to do. We've got Castle Garenberg because it lets us cheat out Gargos on a bad draw, and it's just generally powerful in this list. Cavern of Souls, great in everything tribal. You name Druids, not Hydra, 99% of the time. Unless maybe you're holding this in hand and you know the blue mages want to counter magic and you want to slam this and play Gargos and punk them out. Disciple of Freyalise here, Elf Druid, and it draws cards, everything we want it to be. Dried Arbor. Dried Arbor is, of course, Dried Arbor's in here because we're playing Green Sun Zenith, which we can tutor for on X equals 0 to cheat a land into play a turn early. It's honestly low effort to play. You could theoretically cut this into a forest if you're tired of it getting killed, which is a pretty reasonable thing to do. Colony Ambush. Once again, this is a land, so there's no reason really not to run it. We can afford the tap land. Getting the fight is wonderful. Mosswort Bridge, getting some card advantage on a land with Hideaway. We can almost always meet the condition, is very helpful. Oron Reef. This gives you the chance to throw 1/1 counters on your guys. You don't always have the opportunity to use the ability, but it happens enough of the time to justify its slot easily. Plaza of Heroes. So Plaza of Heroes, most importantly, you can exile and give target legendary creature hexproof and indestructible. And that's really why you're running it. You won't do it all that often, but we can afford the space to run it. You could absolutely cut this for some other, like a Rogue's Passage or some other utility land. Anything that's not on the list you want to add, that's the first one I would cut. We've got Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, to add a ton of mana on our Devotion to Green. This is, of course, going to be no problem for us to meet the conditions for this to be mana positive. And this is just a low-risk card we can play to go basically late game, turn a land into a sorcery, go get a guy. I have been pretty underwhelmed with this card. Once again, we're only running it because there's very little downside to running it. It's not something that is much better than a forest like 99% of the time. Tyrite Sanctum. This is goofy, but you can turn your legendary creature into a god and put a 1/1 counter on it, and then you can sacrifice this to put an indestructible counter. It's a low opportunity cost way to, once again, give indestructible to some of our important targets, and that's why we're running it. Most of the time, you won't activate this for anything other than tapping it for colorless mana, but nevertheless, it's here. Once again, we can afford the tap land, and putting a 1/1 counter on a creature can be very relevant for this deck, but also more to the point, it's going to trigger a Gargos fight. And War Room, we're in mono green, sometimes card draws a challenge. Having it stapled onto a land is actually really helpful. Beast Within, we just need removal for permanents, and this is a great way to blow up a land or another problematic permanent, and so that's why it's in here. I mean, I run Beast Within in almost all my green decks, and I'm rarely disappointed. Court of Calling, we do run enough creatures for the Convoke to be relevant, although often we just tap them for mana. But end of turn, Court of Calling into many of the relevant like card draw druids or even convoking into like a Crater Hoof Behemoth, which we'll go over here in a sec, can be really good. It's a lot of mana, but mana is something we're good at, and so I've rarely been disappointed in it. It's interesting to try to think of creatures that you can use this into that might give your board indestructible. Like there's a beast that does that, but most of the time, most of the targets for this list are just some sort of utility piece like a Vigor. Crater Hoof is here to end the game. Absolutely phenomenal card. Costs a lot of mana, but that's no problem for us. Um, and essentially, this turns all our dorks into a game-winning action. Honestly, you can probably cut it and run all sorts of other big game enders, and it would probably be fine. I just like this one because it makes the elves go from being little dorks to suddenly being incredibly threatening. Finale of Devastation is mostly in here for the tutor effect, but obviously we can hit the X equals 10, at which point all our creatures gain haste and we tutor out something. So you can do Finale of Devastation for 10, go get the Craterhoof Behemoth, and if you have just a few guys on board, you're almost certainly going to be able to punk somebody out that doesn't have like an effect. Green Sun Zenith, this is a tutor spell. You can Green Sun on turn 1 for green equals X equals 0, and that will go and fit your Dryad Arbor for a little bit of ramp. But more importantly, Green Sun Zenith is just a fine tutor, right? Also shuffles back into your library, which can be occasionally nice if you hit it a second time in a match. Triskelion. So Triskelion is one of the weakest cards in the list. Triskelion in a lot of ways is a weak card, period. But it is kind of a fun combo piece. Because Vigor is wonderful in this list. Sometimes you'll wind up in these kind of go tall commanders, which a lot of people play go tall commander into my go tall commander because I'm not trying to combo people out, and it's a great way just to play like your sluggy beaters. And so when you do Vigor here, you've got this notion of if your dude if Gargos survives combat, you'll get the counters for each of those damage. And so Vigor plus Gargos is kind of a natural combo. I'd probably always run Vigor in my Gargos lists. But Vigor plus Triskelion means that the Triskelion can basically shoot itself, prevent the damage, and put the counter back on the Triskelion. So you're breaking even. That doesn't really do anything unto itself, but Triskelion plus Vigor plus Benevolent Hydra, it doesn't matter how many counters are on the Benevolent Hydra, and this will give us an extra +1/+1 counter each time you trigger that, and so you have a 3-card combo. All the pieces of which are tutorable in this list, albeit not easily, and you can blow out the table with infinite damage that way. It's kind of another thing to go with the Staff of Domination type combo where you can draw into whatever your... If you hit infinite mana with Staff of Domination, then you can also draw into your infinite damage combo. So, honestly, it's not too bad. Considering Pile, most of these are riffs on the same thing. You've got Greater Good here, which often can be used to sack Gargos to draw a ton of cards. It was better when the list was mostly Hydras. It's still nice in case you're in a meta where you need to be able to sack your own stuff a lot, like the take control of target creature meta. Really like this. Warrior's Lesson, this is another great card draw option that you can run. You can target Gargos to fight your way through something and also hit them with Gargos to get a card, and the other creature you target will also cause Gargos to fight something. So you get 2 fights and a card draw, so it's really good. Elvish Pioneer, if you want to sort of fight with your ramp a little bit, you're almost certainly going to have the land for the Elvish Pioneer to trigger, so a fine ramp spell. Hunter's Talent. Hunter's Talent is another source of card draw, which is very nice. It triggers a fight when it comes into play, but the fight isn't targeting Gargos, so you're basically just getting the fight from its own trigger targeting Gargos. So I wind up getting cut, but the card draw tackled onto it is very nice, and so I'm always tempted to re-add it, and it's certainly a strong choice. Inscription of Abundance. So this card got cut because it doesn't give Indestructible or any other benefit beyond just the fight, and at this point that's kind of below what I need in the deck. That said, this thing kicked is pretty great. 2/1/1 counters on Gargos, having Gargos fight something, and then the life gain for the greatest power. You gain a ton of life on this, so it's really, really strong. I don't think it's good enough to run, but it's good. Ram through. Ram through is fun because A, you're not actually fighting with this target alone, so you get kind of that free damage, and additionally you get to trample into somebody. So the thing is, Gargos doesn't natively have trample. That's why it kind of didn't make it into the list long term, but I still think it's good. That's why it's still in the considering pile. Then you have all of these other indestructible effects that I didn't elect to run because I thought I had better options. But Defend the Rider is great because it's only 1 green mana. So for 1 green, the Hexproof plus Indestructible is super undercosted. Horrid Vigor is excellent. Death Touch Indestructible is exactly what the Doctor ordered. This is great to actually kill that creature that is just too big for Gargos. It's rare, but when it does happen, this is a really nice touch. This is nice because you get Indestructible, but you have to get 1/1 counters on your guys, and it doesn't actually target. And so I think it's good, but it's a little bit awkward to get the card draw out of it. And so you'd pretty much have to cut like one of the card draw options to justify running it. And I don't think it's consistent enough. But it's something to consider. Mortal's Resolve, target creature +1/+1 and Indestructible. On the weaker side of the Indestructible options, I would certainly run Defend the Rider before I would run that. Vines of Vastwood. We kind of talked about this one already. At this point in the life cycle of the deck, Vines of Vastwood isn't even good enough to be worth considering anymore. Too bad. Lethal Stand, kind of a lesser version of Defend the Rider, but still very similar. Blighted Woodland. So Blighted Woodland here is a great option if you want to cut one of the utility lands to guarantee you can search up some force on turn 4 to make sure you hit Gargos on turn 5. Most of the time you can do better, but it's a completely reasonable include. Nature's Embrace is such an interesting card in this list. So you can put it on Gargos, which will make Gargos bigger, up to 10 power actually, which is pretty wonderful. You also get the fight on the enchant. It also doubles as the enchanted permanent is a land, right? So you can also be a 3-mana ramp spell in a pinch. I think it's a very strong include. It's not currently in the list, but I'm always tempted to go back to it because it's so flexible. Then you've got Autumn's Veil and Veil of Summer, which are 2 riffs on very similar cards, which basically my spells can't be countered. So if you're playing into some sort of I run 10,000 counter spells meta, you start running both of these together in your list, and suddenly your deck's competitive again. Well, it's never going to be competitive. Your deck's better again. So Yeva, Nature's Herald. This is just a very strong card in general. So Flash, and you can cast green creature spells as though they had Flash. I really love this card, and I'd like to find a room for it. The issue is it doesn't make mana on its own. It's 4 mana in a really tight list. It doesn't trigger Gargos. And while you have a lot of creatures, you've got, let's just disable tags, get the true count. 38 creatures, 39 with Yeva. I still don't know if it's worth it. But it's definitely something I'm considering for this one slot in my 99. If you want to make your deck better, you can run the One Ring, which is true of pretty much every deck in Commander. Agonisaur Rex. So if I wanted to cut Ferocious Hydra, I'd probably run this. On 5 mana, you're getting an 8/8, which is absolutely fine. We can cycle it, and when we cycle it, we can get our counters on our dude. Now, this is an ability, not a spell, so this won't trigger a Gargos fight, but you're still getting your 1/1 counters and trample and indestructible. And if not, you're just casting 8/8 Idiot for 5. So another very strong choice, and honestly is probably better than Ferocious Hydra. I'm going to stick with the Hydra because it's more on theme for me, but I would argue this is probably the better choice. Kamahal. So this can also turn all your idiots into big idiots. It can make your lands also big idiots. And so this is a great game finisher here on 8 mana. You could run this instead of Craterhoof if you wanted to, and this would probably be pretty good. It's also a Druid, so it's more on theme. I've been having a great time with Finale of Devastation into Craterhoof, but this is certainly a strong choice. Sparebreaker Behemoth. So this is kind of a fun one. So you have this idea of it's indestructible itself, and so if you can sneak it out, you can give Gargos indestructible in response to a board removal or something like that. But it's a beast, so it doesn't synergize with much else, and it's a lot of mana, and so it didn't make the cut. But I maintain it's actually pretty good. It kind of competes in that similar spot of like Soul of New Phyrexia here. Just kind of that same theme where you can give your your permanents indestructible. And then you can give them indestructible from your graveyard. This is another strong choice for what it is. But once again, you're 6 mana, and you're an artifact creature, so you don't really trigger a lot of the effects in the deck. And so it's interesting. I would probably actually play Soul of New Phyrexia before I would play the Behemoth, being that this is less mana and can be activated from the graveyard, but that's close. And I don't actually own an extra one, but if I did, I'd probably run Boseiju in here because I can run Boseiju in pretty much any green deck, and the deck will be better. So if you've got extra Boseijus or you're proxying, big recommend this in all your green decks. Just so you have kind of an unconditional channel to blow up an artifact or enchantment. So now we have instead of doing some play testing in Moxfield, instead we're going to have the final call, right? What is the one card we're going to add in our empty slot? Our finalists are Yiva, just because Yeva's so good. Adding Flash to our things is really, really nice. We have a ton of green creatures to actually leverage it. So very, very tempting. And then also in the world of fighting, Hunter's Talent is a strong consideration just because of the card draw. It takes a lot of mana to get it online, but being able to give Gargos Trample with Hunter's Talent, being able to get a free fight out of it off the first chapter, or at least the first level of the class, and then getting your incremental card draw towards the end of the enchantment's life cycle all make this really strong options. And then our last, well, not our last, I'm also tempted to play, if I can find it here, Nature's Embrace in our ramp package. Just because being able to hit your ramp spells on turn 3, in addition to getting a fight if you need a late game, and also getting Gargos as big as it is really, really tempting for Nature's Embrace. Nature's Embrace, however, does not give Gargos Trample, so while you become a 10-9, you still may not be getting through. And we've got our slew of Indestructibles we're not playing. It's tough, but looking at the counts here, I think that I'd rather play Horrid Vigor, because this will also let one of our little dudes get in and do a little bit of extra damage. It's really close. I think looking at all of these across the board, the list would probably benefit the most from either Yiva, Horrid Vigor, or Hunter's Talent. And I think given my options, I'm going to go with Horrid Vigor for the time being, because it's a Death Touch engine, which is really good here. I would have been happy with any of those in the list. So I'm definitely still tuning this, but I'm having a great time playing it, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about it. If you're looking for just like a big, dumb, like honest, big green mana, I think this is a lot of fun, and I think with just some minor tweaks, you can actually make this a lot stronger and still stay kind of on theme. So thank you for watching, and I'll see everyone next time.